Thank you for joining us on Lombardi Live, and remember, you can see recent episodes on Drum Channel's YouTube and over 75 on-demand episodes at drumchannel.com. Sign up today and you won't miss out. You know, I always say talking to legendary drummers is another great way to learn, and tonight's guest certainly fits into that category. His work includes Frank Zappa, John Mayall, Journey, Jefferson Starship, Eric Burdon, David Bowie. The list goes on. Just check out his Wikipedia. And you know, if you played in any one of those bands, you would think you had a great career. Print out his discography and you'll have to plant a forest of trees. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a member of Journey. Let's find out what prepared him for all those gigs. Thank you for joining me today, Aynsley Dunbar.
It's great. It's my pleasure. Thank you, Don.
You know, being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is certainly amazing, but on Drum Channel, we kind of think being inducted into Frank Zappa's band is probably more prestigious than anything that happened to any other drummer.
Well, you know, that's the one thing about Frank. He was just great to play with. I mean, if you want to play out and do what you want to play and play anything, he was open to everything that you did. And what a great guy all around. I loved him. We had a great 3 years together, and I think 6 or 8 albums or something.
Yes, and classic historic ones too. And I've had the fortunate opportunity to interview and talk to a lot of the drummers with Frank. We had a round table that we discussed, which is something we'd love to have you get involved with and do another one too. Diving in more into your relationship with Frank, but first I kind of like to go back to maybe your journey as it started. Looking at what you prepared yourself, even if you didn't know you were doing it at the time as a young jazz drummer. I think of you as a jazz drummer. I can't help that. You know, because you make everything swing so much when you play it. But how important is it to have jazz background for young drummers today?
Well, the big thing, as you just said, was swing, because that's basically what I spent most of my time doing, getting just feeling that feel like energetic swing feel on the cymbal when you could drive the band and feel everybody moving instead of, you know, that's the only thing with rock and roll and the other forms, that you tend to sit on the beat. You don't sort of try and drive the beat. And I think, you know, always the triplet feel always helps the drummers get a swing. If you try and do it in 16th note, you're going to get a very sort of rough feeling. It's not going to move anywhere. But I would agree and say, let's get swinging, do a little jazz, listen to jazz at least. Sometimes, you know, the early bebop with people like Art Blakey, Philly Joe Jones, and Max Roach. My favorite drummer of all was Joe Morello with Dave Brubeck. Yeah. I saw him 17 in Liverpool, and we just watched an English jazz band play the opening act, and then he came on and he played, and it was like night and day with how sort of more controlled and professional he was. One of the greatest things was he's playing brushes at the beginning of the song, and he can't see. I don't know if you'd turn and notice if he was blind then, but he was like 35, 36 or something. And he finished and changed to sticks. And what he did, he picked up the sticks, put one brush down on the bass kick drum and picked up his sticks and twirled the other stick up of the brush up in the air. And when it landed on the kick drum, it was right in time with the downbeat. It was sort of like one of those things we go, how the hell did he do that? But I'm sure he spent a lot of times in the studio or in his drum room working away on all those things.
Yeah, I got to know him well in the latter years of his life, and know him a little earlier through Colin Bailey, who was one of my teachers, who was also a student of Joe's. So that was a funny story Colin told. he said he was practicing and practicing, to get as fast as Joe, because Joe had his thing going with his fingers, and
Right.
And Joe came to town, and we were all down at Pro Drum Shop, and he was going to just say, "Hey, Joe, let's go into the back room, and I got something to show you." So we all knew what he was going to do, was try and go back there and show Joe he got as fast as he was. That was kind of his quest. So he comes out after going into the room with Joe, and comes out, and we're all kind of like, "What happened?" He says, "Well, I got fast as Joe, but he got faster." So you're self-taught, as I believe, right? You're, as opposed to legitimately taking lessons for a long period of time with a teacher?
Yeah, I was self-taught, and I never had time. When I got back off the road, I was so burned. I didn't really feel like going and asking anybody. I didn't even realize you could get lessons from Joe Morello.
But on the other hand, don't you think a great lesson from Joe Morello is seeing him play?
Yeah, absolutely. At that point, it blew my socks off, as you might say back then.
So,
but yeah, I agree. I'm definitely self-taught. I just heard drums and drums and drums, and used to love chasing lead instruments, playing drums.
and you said a key word. You used to love hearing drums and drums, because the way we learned back in our generation wasn't from videos. It was from listening to records, right?
Exactly. Yeah, or listening to the radio, whatever you could hear music from. Yeah. In England, Don, we had that problem. When I started playing jazz, I would have to look up jazz albums, and then I found Downbeat magazine. So I started reading Downbeat and listening to all the jazz stars, and all the new albums coming out. And I would go to the record store and say, "Oh, do you have this in?" "No." "Well, would you get it for me?" And they go, "Well, it'll take about 3 years."
Wow.
And then the Beatles hit, and then all of a sudden records started, they found a way, because money drives people to do things, which of course makes everything work. And they started, as soon as the Beatles song was out, it was in America and everywhere else. So they started doing the same with everything else, and realizing that, hey, we're making tons of more money this way. So consequently, we started getting albums when they were released on Downbeat.
I remember those years for sure. That was before there was a modern drummer. It was Downbeat that we waited every month to see what was the drum section of Downbeat.
Yep.
Now,
that was the best magazine of all for me.
I assume Buddy Rich was a big influence, because I see some of the Buddy tricks in what you were doing back in those days.
I never saw Buddy. I met him one time when I was with Journey in some town in middle of America, but I never actually saw him playing. I got a couple of, I just got albums. That was basically the only way to hear him. I wish I could have seen him, but it's like, as I said, all I heard was drums. So I could pick up the flow of things, but try and play what Buddy was playing. Sometimes that was just, no one can. It was all in his mind and how he practiced and formulated his solos. But it's definitely something that I would have headed for, but never could achieve.
Well, I've got to say, as a fan, looking back at those years when I saw you playing, and even in more recent years too, that you have amazing technique. And some of the things that you heard him do, one of the tricks that I loved was playing between the left hand and the bass drum in the middle of your solos. You just got that going as if it was two hands going, which was, think about, in your formative years, because it's interesting for students to hear about this. What kind of was your practice routine?
I sort of practiced. I warmed up on a pad for about an hour or so. Then I'd go up to where my drums were, and had all the neighbors come out and stand in the street drinking their beer from the pub across the street. I didn't realize it was happening until a few months into doing it. But I would just practice in my bedroom with no soundproofing whatsoever, and just start playing along with records, basically. And I started learning to play, the 4-bar fills with the records and the 8-bar fills. And I would just go along and hear what really interested me. I never tried to practice like somebody, like picking something up and going, oh, I got to copy that. It all happened through the mind and hearing and the sounds. God, I just don't know. I practice like triplet, on the kick drum on the second beat and on the third beat, and just practice different fills. And never had, somebody said to me, well, maybe you could show us some of your fills that you've practiced. I go, I don't practice fills. I hear the song and the fills just come. I don't sit there and have a repertoire of fills that I go, okay, I'm going to play number 3 for this fill, or number 5 or 10. I just hear the song and then play what I feel like fits that part.
I think that's an important message. You had 2 things there that I think are really important. One, you started out by practicing on a pad, as that's something that we encourage a lot of drummers to do. And sometimes young drummers are so much into copying what's on YouTube, they skip the pad part of their experience in their life, which is how you build your body up in order to have a library, just like you did, of things you could call upon to play whatever you heard.
Yeah, and the other thing is I practice for about, I have my own warm-up routine. I do that in my room in the hotel before I hit a gig, and then do the sound check, then come back, and then I go to the dressing room before we do the gig, and I start doing that routine again, which is about 35, 45 minutes. But I usually get really heated up and ready for stage, loosened up, and feel like my fingers are working and my feet are working,
So to dig into that a little bit, your warm-up routine, interesting. Do you do series of singles? Are you singing songs and playing along to them? What do you do on the pad as you're warming up?
Well, I use the metronome, and I start off at like 110 and do single sticks, both hands, starting with the right, then doing up 20 bars right and 20 bars left, then double sticking, starting with the right, starting with the left, 20 each, and then, actually not crush rolls, but, actual marching band rolls for 20 bars for each with each hand again. Then I start with single paradiddle. Then I do the next version, which is a double beat ending on the and. Then the next version, which is starting with a double beat. And then the last version is 3 beats and then ending with on the beat. All those, and then I just do those one after the other. Then I have a thing from Lawrence Stone's finger control or stick control. I do a couple of things from that too, just to give me stretch out a little bit more on various fields. But I do that up to about 160.
And how long does that whole routine usually go?
Anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes.
Going through your life's audition processes, were there some that were harder than others? And what do you think was the main thing, if they auditioned several drummers, that gave you that edge? So drummers out there know what they should be working on.
Boy, that's hard to say, because the only thing I ever auditioned for, or asked to audition, was Whitesnake. And that was because they had a problem with every young drummer, and every drummer that came in couldn't play Bad Boys, the double kick drum part, for the time it took. And when I got there, they go, okay, do you want time off before we do it again? I went, no, let's go through it again. They go, wow, we just had some 18 and 20-year-olds in here that couldn't even play that one time through. I went, well, too bad. Let's get on with it. So we did it, and that's how the Whitesnake Green album came out.
Your other experiences, in terms of the luminary artists, I mean, think of Frank Zappa coming up and seeing you play and then asking you to be in his band. That's the quintessential compliment, I would think. And what is it you think that he saw that he really appreciated more? Just trying to encourage the young drummers out there not only to work on their chops, but work on their musicality.
Well, actually, he came to see me at the big BYG record festival in Brussels. And it was a miserable night. And I was on stage with Retaliation, my band. And a producer who used to go to France and do interval music, if you could call drum solos interval music. He would record drum solos and play them interlude on French TV. So he was at the show and he came over and goes, do you mind if Frank Zappa sat in? And I went, no, not at all. He goes, he doesn't have his guitar. Could he use the guitarist's guitar? So I asked John. So he went and asked John, and John handed over, and Frank came on stage, played 3 songs, gave me a 32-bar solo in, I think in 3/4, and played a shuffle, a straight, and basically the 3/4 was more like a jazzy 3/4. And he left and then came to my car and started talking to me about how I do great coming to America and doing sessions and doing this, that, and the other. And so we never agreed on anything at that point. But next minute, I went down to the Speakeasy. I had this feeling I had to go down the Speakeasy in London, which was a club I used to play at with my band. And I walk in the door, and the person goes, "Oh, Frank Zappa's waiting for you in the restaurant." I went, "What?" Okay, so I went to the restaurant, and there's Frank, and he invited me to have a meal. And then that's when he asked me if I'd like to join his band.
Wow. And what was your first reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction was, "But Frank, I've just started an 8-piece band called Blue Whale. But just going to let me think about this and get back to you." So I got back to him and said, yes, I'd like to do it. So in February of 1970, I left everything and emigrated to America.
Another part of the British invasion that we love so much.
Yeah, it really invaded.
So, with a great swing to it too. Now, unlike some of the other gigs you had, in terms of playing and fulfilling the main job of a drummer in a band, which is like making the song feel good, making it swing, getting them to dance, move, if you want to think of it that way. Frank required a whole other area of chops, I would think, in the reading. How did you, which is not easy from what I've heard talking with my dear friend Terry Bozio, how did you master that?
I sort of was taught reading lessons back in Liverpool, and they weren't really that great because I really didn't feel what the teacher was trying to show me in reading. So I sort of quit that and got a basic understanding. So when I joined Frank, when he started pulling out the 5 charts and everything, I said, I understand it, but I've got to, if you want me to do this, I got to take it home and run it through. Because, when you get a 3 with a 5 across 2 of the bars, including a bass drum double beat in between, it's sort of something I can accomplish, but I had to sort of hear it and feel it out to get it. But once I did it, it was, it's like one of those things that I wasn't a reader, and I don't think Buddy Rich was a reader either. So it didn't, I wasn't, I felt like reading music too thoroughly sort of stunted your feel. You got too squared off and too, were technical in a wrong direction. Not technical with a feel, but technical because you can be technical. And a lot of things I heard after that, and I still hear from American drummers, that they don't really feel as much. They just see the notes and play them, but there's no depth to it. And that gets to be a little problematic, I think, when it comes to, listening to the music.
That's the real art form, I think, being able to see something on a page and bring it to life. That's what you're seeing is almost more of a reference of what you want to produce.
Right, and basically the best way to do that is, if you're going to read, memorize it. Then go home. If you don't read that well, like me, you go home and you practice. And you go through it, then you get it to feel like it should feel. Then you've got it memorized, and you don't have to look at pages to see where the hell you are.
Perfect.
But you know what I mean? It's sort of, if you memorize the parts, you can get through anything. I used to memorize 3 hours of his music.
Wow.
And at one point, he talked to me about joining the band for that European, the last thing he did. He wanted me to learn 102 songs overnight. I said that was just a little challenging. As I know, some of his songs are like an hour to 3 hours long.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
So I said, I don't think that's possible, Frank, even for me.
What was one of your, I think I know the answer to this, but maybe one of your most memorable, at least one of my most memorable appearances you did with Frank? I'm thinking that's Carnegie Hall.
Yes, he would. That's the funny thing about that. It was a great. He gave me an acetate of that show, which I still have, and he just nowadays, of course, producing records is a whole different thing to what it was back then. And he had one mic over the drums, and he said he couldn't split the drums into stereo, so he couldn't put the album out. So I don't know if they managed to find a way to split the stereo or whatever, but I know they put it out, and I've not heard it because nobody sent me a copy.
Of all the shows you did with Frank, is there any that particularly stand out as being strangest or most clever or hardest?
Well, the one in LA with the LA Philharmonic, that was pretty interesting to see all those Philharmonic players, the ones that could ad-lib, got on stage and jumped up and started playing their instruments. People with cellos and everything would be up there pounding away. But a lot of them just left because they had no way of ad-libbing.
That differentiates the line between a classical musician who's there to interpret the part and someone who can ad-lib. And that brings up an interesting point. The ability, a lot of drummers get stuck, and we get emails a lot on Drum Channel. It's like, how do I learn how to improvise? Any tips you could give them? Listen
to early recordings of people, and if you're looking at jazz improvising, and listen to the early bebop and stuff, and just get a feel for what they're doing. Usually they're either backing something a keyboard player's doing, or else they're backing the lead instrument. But it's not playing a million notes back there. It's just playing a few pushes here and there just to keep the band moving.
And of the people you'd briefly mentioned that you looked up to back in those days, and looking at the drum set, the evolution of the drum set itself, talking about Jimmy Chapin, who wrote his book in the late 40s. For the first time, a drummer was not playing the bass drum on 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yep.
And as bebop evolved, the drums became more of the timekeeper, but also part of the rhythm section, if you will. But who are some of your favorite albums that you would think people should listen to, or musicians back from those days?
Well, definitely Miles Davis. I'm trying to think. I have The Loneliest Monk at the Town Hall, which I thought was a really off-the-wall record. I really liked that. Of course, all the Brubeck albums. And then, of course, there's Art Blakey.
Now, there's a crush roll for you.
Yep. That was one of the things that actually got me doing crush rolls. But I didn't do crush rolls like that because I found it too impeding to what you were going to do next. I actually managed to do double and just keep the double compressed more. And when you do it that way, you're in more control. And it's actually, you can raise the volume, because with crush roll, you can only press harder and harder. With the double stick, you can actually lift your sticks up to get them loud.
With Art Blakey, I almost think, we call it a crush roll, but it almost was beyond the rudiment itself, it was kind of a soundscape that he created that sounded like, a freight train coming through, and who knew what was going to happen next.
Yeah, it was always like the big whoosh.
Yeah,
and an explosion on the cymbals. Yeah.
You'd almost sit up as he was doing it too at the same time.
Really, I never saw him live.
Only saw him a couple times. I fortunately saw Buddy many, many times because he would come to LA and I'd go out and see him and had the opportunity to hang out with him personally on many of those occasions with mutual friends. We mentioned this earlier. A key thing that he said about his playing, he was asked by Alex Acuna, and Alex at a very early age, when he went to see Buddy in Las Vegas, he said, "Buddy, hey, how do you do that? How do you do what you're doing?" And Buddy said, "It's natural." And that was his only comment. And Alex said that changed his entire life, his whole perspective about, just like you're saying, it is, your technique came natural, your approach to music, it's natural. It's what you're hearing and what you're recreating. That's so important for young musicians to understand, I think.
Well, yes, because we didn't have DVDs and videos to watch of people playing, which majority of the times, it's all overdubbed. It's not actually the time of the recording, so everything's a lie. There's nothing. It's all set up by Pro Tools and everything else now. So it's lost that depth, that feeling that you used to get from being able to play, with feeling.
And back in those days, there was no click, there was no metronome, there was no click track. You were it.
Yes, and that gave you a chance. So when things subtly quietened down, you could subtly slow the song, which would make it feel like it relaxed. But with a metronome, you can use dynamics, but it's still going to have that edge, which is going to keep it going, regardless whether you're playing quieter or not. You've still got something hammering away underneath. And when things get faster, actually when they get more intense, they're actually just maybe speeding up a fraction. That's what makes them intense. But not so much that they actually fly off the wall. You don't want to pick up 20 beats per minute on the metronome when you're speeding up. But it's a good feeling. In fact, Shelly Manne and Ponciano at Shelly Manne at the Black Hawk, that song flies. And there's one point where the keyboard player, English keyboard player, he starts this riff going underneath the trumpet player, and it gets so intense. You hear the trumpet player starting to lag because the rhythm section is just whipping along, and he can't get in front of it. He can't really play any notes that will match what the rhythm section's doing. And I think that's an amazing little album right there.
Yeah, bringing up a good point. Rushing is one thing. If the whole band is speeding up and it's adding to the intensity, I think of Milestones, Miles Davis, that track. I mean, it ends up way faster than it started, and you don't notice it if you didn't play it at the beginning and the end because it just feels right.
Is that with Tony?
No, I'm thinking this was with Philly Joe.
Okay.
One of the the earlier original Milestones. They recorded Milestones on a couple of occasions, and even some of the earlier Earth, Wind and Fire. Even just at the beginning of their career, some of those songs sped up nicely too. But it wasn't, it was part of the intensity of the whole band. That's kind of what you're saying. I mean, you don't. I used to say, you don't want to come back in and have the lead singer sound like they're on helium. You can't speed up that fast. but if the whole thing progressively goes a little bit, that's nothing wrong with that.
You're doing it on purpose. So you want to hear the singer sound like he's on helium.
Right. But all of those, I mean, just think about that, everyone. Listen to all of the huge discography that Aynsley has, and those were done live. The band was in the studio, or you were recording, especially if it was done live, and you were creating that time feel. Your relationship, a drummer's relationship in a band situation to the bass player in the rhythm section. How would you think a young drummer should look at that?
It depends who wants to be in control. If the bass player wants to be in control, then I'll be really cautious because you're going to be subtly stripped of all your chances to make anything feel. The bass player basically should be listening to the drummer, as far as I'm concerned. Of course, the more name the bass player has, the more he feels he's above all that and knows where he's going. But it's a challenge to the drummer, because I've had to do albums where I've actually not had the bass player there, just because it just got in my way, basically, from what I felt and what was coming out.
And then lay the bass in later. The bass player would come in and put his track down later around what you were doing.
Exactly. Yeah. One more thing, Tom. You know, the main thing is people want us to play with feeling. So you go in and you do your tracks, and you're at the beginning. You're the metronome at that point. Then they come back, overdub their parts all over. But do they ever ask the drummer, would you like to overdub your part so that you could play with the band now? No. So we play basically with ideas of what the band's going to play, because majority of the bands come back and they do the new solos and everything else on top, because they suddenly got a new spirit from what was happening underneath them to what they were actually doing it in, at home. But we don't have the chance to actually back that, which I think is one of the things I would love to be able to do, because I did it with one song on the Journey album, and it made a huge difference. But
what was that?
I'm not telling you, because they didn't know.
Oh.
And I'm protecting the producer, because there was no metronome, and it started off with just faint things. Then I had to bring it in with a drum, with a crush roll, sort of. And it had to be right on time. And he put all his faith in me. And I went in there before they came in to listen to the tape. We went in early, and I did it in the first try. And it was just, it was unbelievable from what it was before. It was like what they were making do with turned out to be something completely so much better after I redid it.
Yeah, and the drummer should have the opportunity to do that, as opposed to being the drum machine, if you will, that everything lays over the top of. That doesn't work.
No, because it's supposed to be a feeling from everybody on the outcome.
Yeah.
So, it's a feeling for everybody. So the drummer isn't just the metronome. Why don't you just use a metronome then? Go in there and play your parts, and then let the drummer come in and do the finishing touches. We're like the people that finish painting the picture, basically, because we can do the rolls where you need them when we know they're there, because majority of the time the songwriter doesn't even know what's going to come out at the end, and then changes everything in his mind, what's going on. And then, it would be really nice to be able to go in there and go, okay, this is the finishing touches, this is the icing on the cake, because now we know what the solo is that you played, and now we know what the song is, because now we hear the vocals as they should have been, and the backing vocals. So now it makes a big difference to what was played at the beginning. But we never get the chance, because they go, oh boy, that's going to cost more money. So think about it. Go in there, play the part, and then tell them you want to overdo it at the end.
You just said something key too, that I've heard through life, that young drummers don't think about the vocals. I interviewed Hal Blaine, and I said, when you go into the studio and doing 2 or 3 dates a day, creating all of those hits, I said, what do you want to find out about the song when you go in? And I thought it would have been the tempo, the style, the pattern. And he said, no, the first thing I want to know is, what are the vocals? What are the lyrics to the song? That's going to affect me as a drummer in terms of the emotion that I'm putting into that.
Yeah, I agree with.
How do you look at playing live as opposed to playing in the studio? 2 different emotional experiences, or?
Well, yeah, I love playing live because I actually get off on the audience, and if they're enjoying it, it makes our lives so much better. Studio, I love studio work too. It's sort of like, if you could do one, you'd really miss the other. It's sort of like, I love studio work, but I think playing in front of an audience is one of the main things that makes you a musician. how you can play to an audience.
For a young drummer today who wants to make a career out of playing, any key tips that you might be able to give them?
Nowadays, it's getting more and more legal, and you've got to have a little bit more business sense, and you better read those contracts or have somebody read them for you. Before you sign anything, please get an attorney to look at contracts, because you will get thrown to the dogs if you don't.
Interesting, not only for today, that's something that a lot of people look back on their lives through history that they'd wish they got a better handle on it. Because as a young musician in a rock band, you're so much into what you're doing, it's just like you kind of don't have that. You don't think of yourself as getting older.
No, and the big thing is, of course, that they make use of that. So they make use of how young you are to be able to choke you and con you into doing things that you wouldn't do with the excitement of the moment. Oh, yes, we're going to get a record contract. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Yeah, but that record contract usually means you lose your publishing or something as well, which is basically your life work gone to the record company. So just be careful. That's what I would say.
Publishing, being able to write, how important is it for a young drummer to learn, the compositional side, being able to write, arrange?
Well, I'm not sure. I started, when I was listening to albums, I realized how important arrangements were. So that's how I managed to play through the albums, was I had more fun knowing that there's going to be a 4-bar break, or there's going to be a 2-bar break coming up with a little accent on somewhere. So I would get to memorize the part, the tracks, and just play along with them. And that sort of gave me the insight that every time I do a session, if I don't get anything, which I usually don't get any music, I usually just notate it myself. That makes it a lot easier than trying to memorize a long song. If you can just notate it in simple notation, but be able to know how to break down a song.
Do a cheat sheet, I guess they call it, where you have just a basic outline of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Stuart Copeland, in one of his shows on Drum Channel, was answering a question about being able to get publishing rights on songs. And he was like, he said, what you want to remember is that at the end of the track, if you're in the studio, just as it's fading out, just scream as loud as you can. Get your voice on it somehow, so you get the publishing on it. The credits as being one of the writers. Something that's kind of drum geeky, but I noticed it in your playing and in your solos, and revisited one of my favorite ones, which is the one that we'd spoken about with I think it was the Zappa, or maybe it was the 74 Journey solo, I think, where you're playing things that are very melodical, but the hi-hat's going on 4 all the way through it. Is that kind of your foundation timekeeper?
Some of the time, yeah. Basically, I would say yes, rather than the kick drum. But I can play the hi-hat in between and do weird things with it too if I need to. But yes, when I'm hammering out something and I want to get things to be maybe a little bit more aggressive, then it's good to have the something showing 4, so people can keep some sort of idea of what you're doing.
I've also heard some drummers say, talking earlier about your relationship with the bass player, the bass player should be looking at the hi-hat more than anything else in terms of seeing where your time's going.
Well, that's a good start. The other thing is listen to what the kick's doing too, which might help find some sort of foundation for a feel. Because everybody wants to go boom, 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 all the way through songs and stuff to make it simpler for them, instead of finding a pattern to make it actually mean something.
Now, I said earlier I can't help but thinking of you as a jazz drummer because everything you do feels so good, but you're also one of the world classic rockers, and that's kind of a lead into what's that all about? Another band?
Yeah, it's what I've been playing with for the last, believe it or not, 22 years. But it's sort of corporate work with a couple of public gigs thrown in. And COVID really wrecked us because everything stopped. And so basically we're doing a couple of gigs a year, and that's a lot of hard work on an old guy like me. Warming up for an hour and a half to 2 hour gig with high intensity, it's wearing. So be aware when you get to 19 or 20, you better be working out.
Yeah, there you go. But when I heard about that band, and I think we got in touch with you on supplying some drums at one point or another, I just thought that this is a great band. You should stand on its own. Corporate gigs, plus the world should know about it because there's so much. It's great music. I guess that's what I'm saying.
Yes, well, 70s and 80s music, which was, I think is great. We established some great feelings out to the audience, and the audience responds. We've had some great, playing in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people at a gig, etc. Not quite like doing the Journey songs with the Stones, where it was 105, 110,000 people out there. But when you get 5,000 people really enjoying what you're doing, it's just as good because at least you can see them.
I'm going to ask the crew here. Any questions you guys have?
I'd love to know a bit more about his experience with Bowie.
He would like to know a little bit more about your experience with David.
That was interesting because I was doing a Lou Reed album, Berlin, in London. And I'd been listening to Bowie for about 6 months beforehand. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there and the phone rings, pick it up, and the person goes, hello, is this Aynsley? And I went, yes. He goes, it's David Bowie here. We have I'd like to invite you to a concert tonight. See if you could sit in with me. I've got Jeff Beck coming. And I went, what? Okay, Deb, yeah, because I think we have tonight off. Do you mind if I bring Lou Reed? And he goes, okay. Well, I'll ask him and see what he says. So I asked Lou Reed. Lou Reed gets all perked up and goes, oh, I'm going to call a session tonight. So he calls the session, and we all go in and do nothing. Basically, you spend 6 hours twiddling our thumbs, not doing a thing. So at the end, I get Lou Reed and I take him to the party afterwards because Bowie invited me to that. Lou wanted me to be his band leader, and I just didn't want to do it. It wasn't that inspiring to me. But Bowie asked me if I'd like to join him. And I said, yeah, that would be absolutely fantastic. So he goes, okay, I want to do an album, so-and-so and so-and-so. Please, let's get together and do that. So then we did pin-ups at the Chateau Herville, just outside of Paris. And he was just great. He gave me a limousine. I used a limousine every night, went into Paris, went to clubs, came back, started recording the next day, went out, had dinner, went to the clubs. Just, it was just he was an all-around great guy to be with. Just the management got in the way. So I was with him for 6 months and did that was what was the next golden? It was pinups then.
Diamond Dogs.
Diamond Dogs, yes, Diamond Dogs. That appeared. I got a few on that, and the whole of it pinups.
And you're such a humble man. You've done such great things throughout the history. Jefferson Starship, another great example of creating classic rock, drum tracks that every drummer should learn and then make it your own.
Like the beginning of Freedom of Point Zero. They go, oh, yeah, well, how about a drum solo? How about a drum intro? So they leave the room, and I think they were thinking about going out and spending a couple of hours doing other things. I basically went through it 3 times, and I think I got on the 3rd time what I wanted to play at the opening. And that was what it was. And they wanted to come back in and continue working, which I don't think they were very pleased about. They thought they were getting a free day.
Little did they know who they were dealing with, right?
Yeah, it's like feeling the song. I have to think about where the song went. So the opening had to break into the song, so it blasted in because it actually started off pretty powerfully.
Your experience with Eric.
Oh, I had a wonderful time with Eric. I loved touring Germany and everything else and getting back and forth 2 times a year to Europe and having a lot of fun. You know, he was a funny guy. He and I were we were exhausted after each show. And he's the only other guy I've known that's perspired more than me.
There's an insight you won't get anyplace else. And with Journey, any particular moments that you recall in that experience that stick out in your mind?
Not really memorable. All I remember is that we traveled 5 days a week. We did 2 day off, 3 day off, and we traveled to the next gig on that day off, and then we flew pretty well to every gig in between. So it was like continuous motion. Get on stage, I'll go straight to the sound check the drums, and then go to the hotel, have dinner, then come back out and do the gig. And then we'd go back to the room, and then up early in the morning, flight to the next destination. And the only thing I could say was like playing at Soldiers Field, and we did 2 other gigs with the Stones. That was, the Soldiers Field one was funny because we all had the same trailers. And Mick Jagger was high as a kite. He came to the door of the RV thing that they use as a dressing room, big long container thing, and he opens the door. He walks up and he looks at everybody in there, and I could see on his face he's going, "What the fuck are you in here for? What are you in my house?" And I said, "Your place is actually over there." Oh, he goes, "Thank you," and took off. It took them an hour and a half after we played our gig, because we went down so well. The crowd just utterly loved us. And so just feel how 105,000 people just going berserk. The Stones kept them waiting for an hour and a half before they went on stage. And that was so that the crowd would forget us. And that, as soon as they were announced, of course, the crowd forgot all about Journey, and it was all about the Stones. So it wasn't, they played a little game of just hold it here. We'll make them want us before we go back on stage. So it was a good gig.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today, and I look forward to getting together in person without too many more months going by, and keeping more in touch.
Absolutely, Don, please. Don't be a stranger to me. I feel weird about calling up the office to talk to anybody, because I know you guys are busy. And I don't want to be chatting, on a wing when you're going, I got this meeting coming up, I got that to do, so.
No.
My thing is, I'm always free.
No, well, and you can call me anytime, because I look forward to that. I imagine when you were a 17-year-old jazz drummer, first thing in your mind was that I'm going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame one day, but there you are, so well deserved.
Though I was just happy to be able to have enough money to be able to make ends meet every week.
As a drummer, so it can't get better than that.
Right.
Aynsley, thank you for joining me today. If people want to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
They have to go through Wendy Dio, my manager. She's in Burbank, or was in Burbank. She might be at Canoga Park now. But that's on the website too.
And the website is?
Aynsleydunbar.com.
And if you have questions, you can always ask them here at Drum Channel, and I'll get a hold of Aynsley and we'll answer them for you. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Absolutely, Don. Thank you.
We'll do a virtual handshake here. There you go. There you go. All right. Take care. And then we'll see you soon on the next Lombardi Live.